Hello everybody, I'm Hujiwana and welcome back to Spacedock. Today we are going to take a look at some design elements that can be used to make a spacecraft look and feel menacing. Like something you would not want to mess with. When it asks, you give it your lunch money. The idea for this came from the first 3 episodes of the current season of Star Trek Picard, as the Shrike is just brilliant from this standpoint. And I'll be talking about it, and spoilers for Picard Season 3, until this timecode on screen right now. Skip ahead if you want to avoid spoilers. So, the Shrike. What makes this thing threatening? Well, most obviously it's got to be that quartet of huge forward-facing blades. They're all jagged and vicious looking, and there's smaller, pointy, curvy bits on the main hull. The primary claws house some of the ship's many weapons, as well as the emitters for its special stolen party trick, and act as its warp drive nacelles. Small tangent here, but how often has Star Trek had ships with their warp nacelles pushing out forward from the main hull? There's been a few where the nacelles were in line or slightly behind, like on the Steamrunner or Sabre, or even the O-berth to some extent, but are there other ships that do what the Shrike does? Anyway, the pointy bits, their shape immediately screams danger, like the massive claws or teeth of a predator. Even the ship's name goes down this route, with shrikes being a type of bird that stabs its insectoid prey onto the thorns and spikes of plants, either to help tear them to pieces to eat, or to save for later. But in this case, the Shrike is the spikes, both literally and thanks to its heavy armament. This Predator look even extends to the way it moves through the clouds of the nebula. These bare glimpses of this evil thing swooping through the dark, toying with its prey that it can utterly overpower at any moment. Also, as it is roughly the same colour as its environment, the Shrike almost gets reduced to only its form. Lighting plays a huge role here in accentuating the shape of the craft, such as those gleaming lines along those big blades. And of course, that baleful gaze from the single lidless eye hanging beneath the ship's central hull. To me, this is the best element of the ship's visual design. Sure, it's a deflector dish, we've seen a lot of those throughout the years, but I don't think any have quite made such a prosaic spacecraft component have such a threatening aura about it. Even something simple like the way the deflector itself is inset back into its pod. This, along with its eye-like shape, gives it the illusion of actively looking at its target, like it's actually a real creature's eye, ceaselessly glaring out at its hapless prey. For me, there's also the obvious parallel to the tripods from the Spielberg War of the Worlds movie, with their massive central searchlight peering out from under their armoured hood. Picard even has similar ominous horn sounds as musical stings for the Shrike, which has to be deliberate. It's way too blatantly similar not to be. And I am here for it, those tripods and their horns are fantastic. The deflector eye is further augmented by the ship always appearing to point slightly downwards, giving the eye that same hooded and ominous appearance as the tripods. There's a particular shot where the ship is sliding around the Titan, and it does this movement while maintaining the downward angle. It's a predator circling its prey. All of its movement is like this. Every single way it moves is with intent and purpose. Even when it got knocked backwards by that early torpedo detonation, look what it does! It doesn't simply get buffeted backwards like the Titan does, it recoils like a snake back into its hidey hole. It's all incredibly well done. Brilliant job from the animation team. So I think I've established that the Shrike is pretty menacing, but it is far from the first ship out there to use this shape to achieve an aggressive, animalistic appearance. For example, EVE Online has some Amar frigates with similar claws, and there's even an underslung pod on the Executioner and its variants. But if we go back to Star Trek, there's a pair of craft from a pair of movies that also do it, sort of. These two are the Narada from the first JJ-verse movie, and the Scimitar from Nemesis. The first of these takes things way too far and it just becomes a mess of spikes and spines and all sorts of serrated pointy bits. It's not exactly subtle in wanting to look unpleasant, but it almost becomes formless. It is only spikes and spines and stabby bits. There's no other visible features. Nothing on it stands out as having purpose or intent. So sure, it is dangerous looking because you wouldn't want to hold the thing in your hand. It's like a very angry succulent that really doesn't want to be eaten by animals. It's a defensively spiky thing. You wouldn't want to mess with it, but it is completely overcompensating to get that aesthetic. The Scimitar, on the other hand, is a more traditional vessel. It has visible engines. You can pick out the components on it and take a wild guess at what they might do. Well, Well, unless it's cloaked, of course. But that cloak also makes it more sinister, because if you can see the ship, it's because it is choosing to be visible because it does not consider you to be a threat. It can fire any of its powerful and numerous weapons from cloak, and it has multiple layers of shielding in case it gets hit anyway. So without the cloak, it's a large and very capable war machine. With the cloak, it's a nigh unstoppable weapon of mass destruction thanks to its Thaleron pulse. Even just in its appearance, it's still menacing. The layered, armoured appearance of its dark hull makes it very clear this is not something the Enterprise crew have ever faced before. This is similar to another dark and spiky vessel that can overpower anything it chooses to face, the shadow ships from Babylon 5. These have something that makes them a bit different though, as they are living creatures, in a way. Their skin is this weird, undulating surface that is totally unlike anything else ever seen by pretty much anyone. Combined with their bizarre multi-limbed shape and ability to phase in and out of hyperspace without generating a jump point makes them deeply alien. So while they are menacing in aesthetic and horrendously destructive, the main element here that makes shadow ships scary is the sense of other that you get from them. They do not abide by the rules that everyone else, even the Vorlons, follow. Shadow ships are simply wrong. How can you possibly fight back against them? That alone has got to be hard on the morale of anybody once they realise what they are actually fighting against. And of course, I can't talk about the Shadows and Babylon 5 without also mentioning the Reapers and Mass Effect, as the latter two are deeply inspired by the former. Reapers are another living being in the form of a starship, but aesthetically I wouldn't really say they are menacing in their shape and general appearance. Instead, what makes them feel dangerous comes from their mystery and vast power, which includes Lovecraftian influence over sentient beings. Being blown up by a hypervelocity beam of molten metal is one thing, but losing control over yourself and not even realizing it? Yeesh! But the elephant in the room here is not the appearance and spooky weirdness of the Reapers, but their scale. Nothing is more threatening than the absolute scope of the Reapers, especially Sovereign at the end of the first game. He can squish you with an accidental movement and not even realize he did it, and even other spacecraft just get swatted aside by its immense bulk. So size has an element of menace all of its own. There's even a specific phobia of large objects, and it is an entirely understandable one because huge things can really make a person feel utterly insignificant. Even to those of us without megalophobia, immensely large objects can still instill a deep sense of awe, and this can be exploited and turned into an implicit threat. For example, the start of A New Hope, with a tiny little Tantive 4 being run down by the much larger Devastator, or the Borg Cube as seen in The Next Generation. Now that thing was a truly ominous object, just this giant box with a similar disregard for spacecraft design that the Shadow vessel had, with no recognisable features at all. Now you may think I'm being a big ol' hypocrite here, as earlier I said that being featureless was a bad thing for the Narada, but I have good reason here. Unlike the Cube, the Narada was not the ship of some deadly and alien threat. It was the ship of an angry Romulan who simply wanted revenge. Having it look like a deadly unknowable horror from beyond, but not to be that, means it writes checks it just can't cash. It doesn't work with itself. In contrast, the Cube lacking features meant it gelled with the way the Borg in general were presented, so it gets away with it. I'm sure there's many more features that can be used to make a spacecraft come across as menacing, but the ones I've talked about today are the ones that seem most important to me. Power, intent, scale. Throw in other spicy elements like unknowable horrors if you want, and if it fits the setting, but it's not at all necessary. And all these elements can be gotten across to the viewer or reader or player in multiple ways. Even sound design and soundtrack can and should be woven into the mix. Let me know in the comments what you think. What particular features do you find make a spacecraft feel threatening? Thanks for watching! Don't forget to check out the SOJOURN's YouTube channel for their new ship breakdown, or the SOJOURN's Patreon for the Guinevere cross-sections. Links are below in the description and pinned comment. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.